Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. We're continuing to make our way through this fantastic little book, Solomon Says. We're in chapter 1 now, and the title of chapter 1 is You Must Rule Yourself. Well, that just pretty much says it, doesn't it? Let's just dig into this, and I'll share with you a few things that I found helpful from this. There's a cracking illustration on page 2 and page 3, which I'm not going to share with you. I'm going to leave that for you to discover for yourself. It is absolutely brilliant. You have to read it about 3 times to realise what he's saying, but it is priceless because it illustrates perfectly the way in which it's all too easy for us not to, so to speak, be in control of our lives, even when we think we are. But really where we're going, page 5, here is the money quote, if you like, which is this is quoted on the back cover of the book. Here it is. If you don't govern yourself, you will be governed by others, and your own impulses will be the reins they use to lead you. That's such critical insight, not just for understanding this book, but for understanding the book of Proverbs and for understanding its relationship to the book of Genesis and many other parts of Scripture. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's just think about what this means. If you don't control your desires, and, so to speak, take control of your life in some meaningful way, then what actually will happen is that other people will be able to drag you wherever you want, and they will use your desires as like the shackles by which they lead you around. Mark gives some examples of this. Let's think, for example, about laziness. He quotes from Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labour. Just think about what that means. Isn't it insightful? If you're diligent, you will rule, you'll be able to take control of your life, and I guess in the ancient world, your farm or your business. But if you're slothful, if you're lazy, then you'll probably be able to sort of relax and lounge around for a few days or weeks or months, but eventually you'll run out of food or money, or the people who are feeding you will run out of patience, and you will end up a slave. Forced labour. You will end up having to work for a pittance for somebody else because you didn't discipline yourself and work for yourself. That's certainly how it worked in the ancient world, and we certainly see parallels to that in the modern world. It might not be slavery, but you can see how the analogy would work. You see what's happened? The slothful desires of the sluggard have become the chains by which that man or woman is bound by his new master, and he is made a slave. Again, one example. Another example, words. Mark picks up on the significance of what we say in the book of Proverbs and makes some very insightful points about it. Our words can ensnare and trap us and get us into all kinds of trouble. For example, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. If we don't control our desire to speak, then what's going to happen is we're going to get ourselves into trouble, in this case with the living God. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. But he who restrains his lips is prudent. That is, whoever is able to control his desire to blurt out whatever he's thinking is prudent and wise. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble, Proverbs 21:23. Well, isn't that just the truth? We mouth off and say something foolish and rash and hasty and suddenly find ourselves in trouble. Indeed, a fool's lips walk into a fight and his mouth invites a beating. Just think of the trouble it's possible to get yourself in by mouthing off when you should remain silent. If we control our desires, we'll be free. If we don't control our desires, in this case to speak, we will end up bound and in chains to other people or beaten up on the sidewalk somewhere. Proverbs 18:6. Now, the background to this is in the doctrine of creation. Genesis 1:26-28 is the so-called creation mandate, and in it God gives to Adam and Eve, man and woman, not just the woman, the responsibility to have dominion and to rule over the creation, to fill it and to subdue it and to rule over it, in effect, in a way that glorifies God. And here's how Mark summarizes that statement. In this text, Genesis 1:26-28, quote, points to the fact that every descendant of Adam and Eve is called to rule over a portion of creation. Here's the key insight, including himself. Perhaps even especially himself. The call to Adam and Eve is a call to all of us to be kings and queens. Just think about that. we often think of the creation mandate, don't we, in terms of our vocation in the world, or perhaps our desires to see the nations and the societies in which we live acknowledge the Lordship of Christ and start shaping their public life in a way which reflects the gospel and the law of God. Well, right, yes, good, true, but we've forgotten the most basic thing. Adam, as you go out subduing the world, remember that you are a part of the world, and you must subdue yourself and not allow your desires to rule over you. You must rule over them. So, again, on page 7, it turns out that the call to rule and control our desires is a deeply Christian imperative. One more example that Mark highlights here is the example of marriage. This is fascinating. Mark points out that when a man and woman get married, I'm quoting now, they promise themselves to each other. The bridegroom offers his self to the bride and vice versa. The assumption is that they are each in a position to actually give what they promise. But how often is that completely true? We might be free to marry somebody, but if you are not, so to speak, in possession of yourself, if you're not in control of your desires, you don't have yourself. You aren't able to give yourself to somebody else if you don't possess your own life. And if you're ruled and controlled by instincts which you're unable to govern, you can't give yourself to somebody else. And in a very practical way, that means you're not ready for marriage. And Mark points this out. When you officially give yourself to a woman in marriage, he's talking to men specifically, quote, you need to be free of habits and vices that would hamper your ability to offer yourself to your bride as a beneficial husband. And you can easily think, can't you, of all kinds of ungodly habits that would mean when you give yourself to your bride, you're actually unable to give yourself to your bride because you won't be, your actions won't be shaped by what's best for her. Your actions will be shaped by what your impulses and desires want. So you start to see this is not just for 16-year-old boys thinking about getting married in the next 5 to 10 years. This is for every Christian man and woman and child, married or not, to think about the significance of that particular relationship as well as others. Fantastic stuff there in chapter 1. I'll show you some things from chapter 2 in a couple of days' time. In the meanwhile, get a hold of Solomon Says by Mark Horne. God bless. Hope to see you very soon. Bye for now.